I was still in the Middle East when I saw the photo. Sand had worked its way into everything: my boots, my sleeves, even the crease of my watch band. The air smelled like metal and heat, and the sky above the base was a pale, exhausted white. My phone buzzed in my pocket during a brief break between convoy checks. I almost ignored it. Almost. The message came from my cousin Mark. "Isn't this Grandpa's watch?" Below it was a screenshot from Facebook. My half-sister Lauren stood beside a brand-new Tesla Model X, her arm draped casually across the hood. The caption read, "Finally dreams do come true. Thanks, Dad." On her wrist, faint but unmistakable, was the reflection of sunlight off the polished chrome dealership signage. And in the comments someone had written, "Didn't your grandfather have a watch just like that?" My stomach dropped before my mind caught up. I zoomed in. The angle wasn't perfect, but I didn't need it to be. I knew that watch the way you know the sound of someone you love walking into a room. Grandpa's watch was gone, and my father had turned it into a Tesla. I stared at the screen until the letters blurred. The desert wind rattled a loose sheet of metal somewhere behind me, a hollow, clanging rhythm that sounded like something breaking apart. I didn't realize I'd stopped breathing until one of the younger soldiers beside me asked if I was okay. I told him I just needed water. That wasn't true. What I needed was to be 7,000 miles away from where I was standing. I scrolled again, slower this time. Lauren looked radiant, perfectly posed. Her hair curled, her smile wide and confident. She had always smiled like that when she felt she had won something. The Tesla gleamed behind her doors, slightly open like wings. The kind of car that announces itself. The kind of purchase that doesn't happen quietly. I checked the timestamp, posted 2 hours earlier. 2 hours. I did the math automatically. The auction house, the watch, the appraisal. The number I remembered from the paperwork. It matched almost perfectly with the price of a used Model X. My father hadn't just sold it. He had converted memory into machinery, legacy into leather seats. I called him, straight to voicemail. I tried again, same result. The heat pressed against my back like a hand. Somewhere nearby, someone laughed. The sound felt wrong, like hearing music at a funeral. I typed a message and erased it. Typed another and erased that too. There were 1,000 things I could say, none of them steady enough to send. Instead, I opened the old photo saved in my phone. Grandpa sitting in his worn armchair, the watch on his wrist, sunlight cutting across the glass. He had given it to me the day before he died. I remembered how heavy it felt when he placed it in my palm, not just in weight, but in meaning. "Your father won't understand this," he had said quietly, "but you will. You always did." I had laughed, then told him I wasn't ready for something so valuable. He shook his head. "It's not valuable because of money. It's valuable because it survived. Like you." Back then, my father had stood in the doorway, arms crossed, expression unreadable. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. I knew he didn't approve. To him it was just an antique. Something to ensure, something to sell if necessary. The bass loudspeaker crackled overhead, announcing the next briefing. I slipped the phone into my pocket, but my thoughts stayed behind with the photo. The rest of the afternoon passed in fragments, checklists, coordinates, instructions. My body moved automatically. My mind replayed the same image, Lauren smiling beside the Tesla. That evening I finally got a reply from Mark. "I heard your dad sold something recently. Big auction. Thought you should know." I sat on the narrow bunk in my quarters, staring at the message. The air conditioner hummed weakly, barely cutting through the lingering heat. My roommate was out on shift, leaving the room silent except for the mechanical drone. I called home again. This time my father answered. His voice sounded tired, distant. "I can't talk long." "You sold Grandpa's watch." A pause, just long enough to confirm everything. "Yes." No apology, no explanation, just one syllable. "That wasn't yours to sell. It was in my possession." "That's not the same thing." He sighed, the sound sharp, irritated. "It's just a watch." I closed my eyes. The words hit harder than I expected. It wasn't just a watch. "You're deployed. You weren't using it. Lauren needed help." Needed. The word hung there like a verdict. "So you sold it." I made a decision. I pictured Lauren's smile again. "You bought her a Tesla." Another pause. She deserved something good. The quiet between us stretched. The air felt thinner. I realized then that he didn't understand not the watch, not what it meant, not what he had taken. "I'm coming home," I said finally. "You don't need to." "I'm coming home." He didn't argue after that. He just said, "Do what you want," and ended the call. I sat there for a long time, the phone still in my hand. Outside, the desert night settled in, bringing a brief, fragile coolness. I opened my laptop and checked the earliest flight I could request after my rotation. My fingers moved quickly, almost calmly. Logistics had always been easier than emotions. Before I shut the screen, I looked once more at the Facebook photo. Lauren had added another comment. "Best surprise ever. Love you, Dad." I stared at that sentence until it felt like something carved into stone. Then I closed the laptop and leaned back against the wall. Somewhere deep inside, beneath the anger and the disbelief, something steadier formed. Not rage, not yet. Something quieter. Something patient. Grandpa used to say that time reveals everything. I didn't have the watch anymore. But I still had time. And I was going to use it. I landed in Seattle 3 days later, the gray sky hanging low like a lid over the city. The air smelled of rain and pine, so different from the dry metallic heat I had left behind that morning. Everything felt quieter here, slower, as if the world had softened in my absence. But inside me nothing had softened. The image of the Tesla sat in my mind like a fixed point I couldn't look away from. My duffel bag felt heavier than usual as I stepped outside the terminal. I hadn't told my father I was coming. I hadn't told anyone. Part of me wanted to see things exactly as they were, without warning, without time for anyone to rearrange the truth. I rented the first car available and drove north, watching the familiar highway unfold. Evergreen trees blurred past their dark branches, dripping from the morning rain. I remembered driving this road with Grandpa years ago, his hand resting on the wheel, the watch glinting in the filtered sunlight. By the time I reached the neighborhood, the clouds had thinned into pale streaks. My father's house looked unchanged, same faded siding, same carefully trimmed lawn. But parked in the driveway was something that didn't belong to that house at all. The Tesla sat there like a polished intruder, black paint reflecting the overcast sky. It looked larger in person, more deliberate. A statement, not just a vehicle. Lauren stood beside it, her phone held up as she took another photo. She wore sunglasses even though the sun barely showed. Her smile widened when she noticed me. "You're back already," she said, lowering the phone. Her tone carried that familiar mix of surprise and mild amusement, as if my presence were an unexpected inconvenience. I didn't answer immediately. My eyes went straight to the car, tracing the lines, the shine of the chrome trim. "Nice," I said finally. She beamed. "Dad surprised me. Isn't it incredible?" "When did you get it?" "Yesterday. Well, technically 2 days ago. I just picked it up this morning." She ran her hand along the hood. It drives like nothing else, completely silent. Silent. The word struck me. Grandpa's watch had never been silent. It ticked softly, a steady heartbeat. This car bought with that same history made no sound at all. "Where is he?" I asked. "Inside. He's resting. You know how he is lately." She studied me. "You look tired." "Deployment." I nodded. I called him. Her smile faltered just slightly. "About the watch." "Yes." She shifted her weight, the first sign of discomfort. "He told me you might be upset. But honestly, it was just sitting in a drawer. He figured it was better to use it for something meaningful." Meaningful. I felt my jaw tighten. Meaningful to who? She shrugged. "To the family." I glanced at the car again. "This is for the family." "Well, for me." "But I am family." Her tone sharpened. "Look, I know you were attached to it. But you weren't even here." Dad made a practical decision. I wanted to tell her what Grandpa had said, what the watch meant, how he had chosen me deliberately. But I stopped. She wouldn't understand. She never had. To her, value was measured in newness, in visible upgrades, in things that announced themselves. The watch had been quiet, personal, invisible, unless you knew where to look. I walked past her and up the front steps. The door opened before I knocked. My father stood there, thinner than I remembered, his shoulders slightly hunched. His expression didn't change much when he saw me, but his eyes lingered searching. "You came," he said. "I told you I would." He stepped aside. "Come in." The house smelled faintly of coffee and old wood. Everything looked the same: the framed photos, the worn couch, the clock on the wall. But the space felt altered, as if something essential had been removed. I realized I was looking toward the hallway table where the watch box used to sit. The spot was empty. We sat across from each other at the kitchen table. Lauren hovered in the doorway, arms crossed, listening. "You didn't need to fly back for this," my father said quietly. "I did." I kept my voice even. "Why didn't you tell me before you sold it?" He folded his hands. "Because you would have said no." "That's because it wasn't yours." "It was in my house." "That doesn't make it yours." Lauren exhaled sharply. "This is ridiculous. It was just an old watch." I looked at her. "You're driving it." She didn't answer. My father leaned back in his chair. "Lauren needed help. Her old car died. She's trying to get ahead. I wanted to support her. And selling Grandpa's watch was the only way." It was the easiest way. The simplicity of that sentence cut deeper than any argument. The easiest way. Years of history reduced to convenience. I stood slowly. "Where did you sell it?" He hesitated. "Auction house downtown." "Did you keep the paperwork?" "In the study." I nodded. "I want to see it." Lauren's voice rose. "Why, it's done. You can't undo it." I met her eyes. "Maybe not, but I want to understand it." My father watched me carefully, then gestured toward the hallway. "It's in the top drawer." I walked down the corridor, each step echoing softly. The study smelled faintly of dust and paper. I opened the drawer and found the folder immediately. The auction receipt lay on top, the number printed clearly. My chest tightened. It was exactly what I expected, almost identical to the price of the Tesla. I closed the folder and carried it back to the kitchen. Neither of them spoke as I set it on the table. "So that's it," I said. "You turned Grandpa's watch into this." Lauren lifted her chin. "Dad helped me. That's what matters." I looked at my father. "Does it?" He didn't answer right away. His gaze shifted from me to the folder, then to the window. Outside, the Tesla reflected the dim afternoon light. Finally, he said, "What's done is done." I studied his face. There was something there, fatigue maybe, or something more complicated. I couldn't tell yet. But I knew this conversation wasn't finished, not even close. I closed the folder and slid it toward him. "Then we should talk about what comes next." The rain started again just after sunset, tapping softly against the windows like someone trying not to be heard. I stayed in the house that night, not because I wanted to, but because leaving felt like surrendering the ground too early. Lauren had gone out to test drive her Tesla, she said, though the keys never left her hand. My father moved slowly through the kitchen, reheating leftovers. Neither of us really ate. The quiet between us wasn't hostile. It was heavier than that, like something waiting to be named. Later, I sat in the living room while he lowered himself into his usual chair. The lamp beside him cast a warm circle of light, softening the lines in his face. For a moment he looked older than I had ever seen him. Not weak, just worn, as if time had finally caught up with him all at once. "You're still angry," he said. "I'm trying to understand," I replied. He nodded faintly. "Your grandfather used to say you were like that, always looking past the surface." I let that sit. The memory of Grandpa's voice felt close again, almost tangible. "Why now?" I asked. "Why sell it while I was deployed?" He exhaled slowly. "Because you weren't here to argue." The honesty surprised me. It wasn't cruel, just blunt. That was always his way: decisions made quickly, explanations offered afterward, if at all. "You knew what it meant to me." "Yes." "And you still did it." "Yes." The repetition stripped the conversation down to something bare and uncomfortable. I leaned forward. "You've always chosen her." He didn't respond right away. The rain grew louder, filling the silence. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter. "Lauren needed stability." "So did I." "You had the military." The words landed with an unexpected sting. To him, my service had always been a form of independence, proof that I didn't need him. Maybe that was part of it. Maybe he thought I could absorb the loss more easily. "She's not the only one who needed support," I said. He looked at me, then really looked. "You never asked." I almost laughed. I shouldn't have to ask for something that was already mine. He rubbed his temple, the gesture tired. You think this was about favoritism? It wasn't. What was it about? He hesitated, timing. The answer made no sense. I studied him, searching for more, but he leaned back, closing himself off. The conversation stalled like a car stuck in mud. Headlights flashed across the wall as Lauren returned. The sound of the Tesla door closing carried through the quiet house, soft, almost whispering. She entered a moment later, cheeks flushed with excitement. You should see it at night, she said, tossing her keys onto the counter. The interior lighting is incredible. It's like driving a spaceship. Neither of us responded. She glanced between us, reading the tension instantly. You're still on this, she asked. It's not going away, I said. She sighed dramatically. Look, I get that you're sentimental. But Dad made a practical choice. You weren't even using it. I didn't need to use it. Then what was the point of keeping it locked away? The point was that it mattered. She shook her head. You always do this, turn everything into some emotional test. It's just an object. I felt the familiar distance between us widen. Lauren had always lived in the present in visible success. She valued momentum, upgrades, forward motion. The past meant little unless it could be displayed. My father watched us quietly, his expression unreadable. I'm going to see you tomorrow, I said to him. He frowned slightly. See me? At the nursing home. Lauren blinked. Why would you do that? He's not moving in there permanently. I know, but that's where your doctor wants you monitored, right? I said, turning back to him. He nodded slowly, just for a few days. Then I'll come there. Lauren looked confused. You're making this way bigger than it needs to be. Maybe, I said calmly, or maybe it's already bigger. She rolled her eyes and headed upstairs. The sound of her footsteps faded, leaving the room quiet again. My father leaned forward, elbows on his knees. You don't have to do this. I do. For what? I thought about Grandpa's words about the weight of the watch in my palm. Because some things shouldn't disappear quietly. He studied me, something flickering in his eyes, recognition maybe, or worry. I couldn't tell. Tomorrow then, he said finally. I nodded. Outside the rain eased, leaving the air still. The house felt suspended between two moments, like the pause before a clock ticks forward. I didn't sleep much that night. I kept replaying the conversation, the strange emphasis he had placed on timing. It felt deliberate, though I couldn't see why. By morning, the sky had cleared, pale sunlight filtering through the clouds. I drove to the nursing home alone, the roads damp and shining. The building stood quiet at the edge of town, its windows reflecting the soft morning light. I parked and sat for a moment, watching people move slowly inside. Nurses, visitors, residents walking carefully along the hallways. The stillness of the place contrasted sharply with the chaos in my head. When I entered, the receptionist smiled politely and directed me down the corridor. My father's room was near the end. The door stood slightly open. He sat by the window, reading, his posture relaxed. You found the place, he said, without looking up. I always do. I stepped inside. The room smelled faintly of disinfectant and coffee. A small table stood between us, bare except for his phone. You didn't need to come, he repeated. I wanted to. He closed the book and set it aside, still about the watch. Yes. He nodded slowly as if he had expected nothing else. Then say what you came to say. I took a breath. You sold Grandpa's watch while I was deployed. You gave the money to Lauren. I came here because I want to understand why you chose that moment. He watched me carefully. The silence stretched. Then, without answering, he picked up his phone. His fingers moved, deliberately dialing a number from memory. He waited, listening. It's time, he said into the receiver. I think they should meet you. He ended the call and placed the phone back on the table. I stared at him. Who was that? My lawyer, he replied quietly. The words landed like something shifting beneath my feet. Outside the window, a breeze stirred the trees, their leaves trembling in the morning light. Inside the room, everything felt suddenly sharper, more defined. Lauren burst through the doorway moments later, breathless. What's going on? You called me. My father looked at both of us, calm now, almost composed. I think he said it's time we settle this properly. Lauren froze just inside the doorway, her expression shifting from irritation to something closer to unease. Settle what? She asked. Her eyes moved from me to our father, then back again, searching for the shape of a conversation she hadn't expected. My father didn't answer immediately. He folded his hands on the table the same way he had at the kitchen the night before. "Sit," he said quietly. "She didn't sit. You called me in the middle of a meeting. I drove all the way here. What's going on?" "I called my lawyer." The words changed the room. Lauren's shoulders stiffened. "Why would you do that?" "Because this isn't just a conversation anymore." She laughed lightly, but it sounded forced. "It's about the watch. You're calling a lawyer over a watch." My father looked at her steadily. It was never just a watch. The sentence hung between us, echoing something I had said the night before. Lauren shifted her weight, her confidence faltering. She glanced at me, then back at him. "Dad, you're overreacting." He shook his head. "No, I'm correcting something." I sat quietly, letting them speak. My pulse had slowed, replaced by a strange clarity. Whatever was about to happen, he had planned it. The timing, the call, the calmness in his voice, it all felt deliberate. "How long until he gets here?" I asked. 20 minutes, my father said. Lauren exhaled sharply. "This is ridiculous. I don't have time for legal drama. The car is mine. The money's spent. There's nothing to settle." My father's gaze softened, but not in agreement. "That's what we're going to discuss." She crossed her arms. "You gave me that money." "I transferred it." "That's the same thing." He didn't argue. He just looked at the window where sunlight filtered through the branches outside. The room felt suspended, like the moment before a verdict. I noticed his phone again on the table. It looked ordinary, but the call he had made had shifted everything. I wondered how long he had been considering it, whether he had decided this before I arrived or because I arrived. Lauren paced the room, restless. "You're doing this because she's upset," she said, nodding toward me. "You're letting guilt drive you." "I'm letting clarity drive me," he replied. She stopped. "Clarity about what?" He didn't answer. Instead, he leaned back slightly, his breathing slow and measured. For the first time, I realized he looked less tired than he had at the house, almost relieved. The hallway outside filled with faint footsteps. A nurse passed by, her voice low as she spoke to someone. The ordinary sounds of the building felt strangely distant from the tension inside the room. Lauren finally sat down, though her posture remained rigid. "I don't understand why you're making this formal," she said. "Because informality created the problem," he replied. Her eyes narrowed. "What problem?" He looked at me briefly, then back at her. "You'll hear it soon." I leaned forward slightly. "You said timing mattered." He nodded. "It does." "For what?" "For seeing things clearly." Lauren shook her head. "This is getting dramatic." My father almost smiled. "Maybe it should be." The door opened softly. A man in a dark suit stepped inside, carrying a leather folder. He looked older, composed, the kind of presence that brings quiet with him. He greeted my father first, then nodded politely to us. "Thank you for coming on short notice," my father said. "Of course," the lawyer replied. "You said it was time." Lauren looked from one to the other. "Can someone explain what's happening?" The lawyer set his folder on the table. "Your father asked me to clarify the status of a recent transaction." "Transaction," she repeated. "The sale of an heirloom watch." Her expression hardened. "That was already handled." "That's what we're here to confirm," he said calmly. I watched my father. He didn't speak, just gestured slightly for the lawyer to continue. The lawyer opened the folder, revealing documents neatly arranged. The soft sound of paper sliding felt louder than it should have. He adjusted his glasses and began. "The watch in question was originally transferred through inheritance to," he glanced at the page, "your daughter." He nodded toward me. Lauren leaned forward. "But Dad had it." "Possession and ownership are not the same," the lawyer said gently. Silence filled the room. I felt Lauren's eyes on me, sharp and searching. "So you're saying," she said slowly, "that he didn't have the right to sell it?" "I'm saying," the lawyer replied, "that the ownership structure complicates the sale." My father watched her carefully, not intervening. Lauren laughed again, but it sounded thinner this time. "This is absurd. It was an old watch. You can't undo a sale." "No," the lawyer agreed, "but we can address its implications." The word implications seemed to land heavily. Lauren shifted in her chair. "What implications?" she asked. The lawyer closed the folder gently. "That depends on how your father wishes to proceed." All eyes turned to him. He sat quietly, then spoke. I wanted to see what would happen, he said. Neither of us moved. The statement felt deliberate, almost confessional. What do you mean, I asked. I wanted to see who cared about what he replied, the object, the money, or the meaning. Lauren stared at him. You sold it as some kind of test. I sold it to force a decision. Her voice rose. That's insane. Maybe, he said calmly, but it worked. The room felt suddenly smaller. I realized he had been watching us not just now, but before. Waiting. Lauren shook her head. I don't like this. I don't like any of this. My father leaned forward slightly. You came for the car, he said softly. She came for the watch. The difference hung there, quiet but unmistakable. Outside, the trees swayed gently in the morning breeze. Inside, the conversation had shifted from argument to something more permanent. The lawyer looked at my father. Would you like me to proceed? He nodded once. Yes, he said. It's time they hear everything. The lawyer adjusted the papers again, more slowly this time, as if giving the moment room to settle before continuing. Lauren leaned back in her chair, arms still crossed, but her expression had changed. The easy confidence she'd worn since I arrived had thinned into something guarded. Before we continue, the lawyer said, I want to confirm that everyone understands this conversation concerns both the inheritance structure and the proceeds from the recent sale. Lauren let out a short breath. You keep saying inheritance. Dad's not... She stopped herself, glancing at him. This feels unnecessary. My father didn't react. Go on, he told the lawyer. He nodded. Your father amended his estate documents 6 months ago. The amendment addressed several items, including the heirloom watch. Lauren's eyes flicked toward me, then back to him. What amendment? The watch was formally designated as a personal inheritance to your sister, he said, gesturing toward me. This was done in accordance with your grandfather's original intent. I felt the air shift again. I hadn't known there had been a formal amendment. Grandpa's will had already transferred ownership to me, but this suggested something more recent, something deliberate. Lauren frowned. But you sold it. Yes, my father said quietly. Then what's the point of this, she demanded. The lawyer answered gently. Because the sale doesn't erase ownership. It changes how the estate must account for the value. Lauren shook her head. You're saying she owns the money now? I'm saying the estate must recognize that the asset was converted. The words sounded clinical, but their meaning was clear. Lauren sat very still, absorbing it. That's ridiculous, she said finally. Dad gave me that money. My father spoke softly. I transferred it. That's the same thing. Not legally. Her gaze snapped to him. You're doing this on purpose. He didn't deny it, yes. The honesty seemed to unsettle her more than anything else. She looked between us, trying to find footing. So what happens now, she asked. The lawyer opened another document. There's also a second component. Your father requested a conditional clause tied to the distribution of the remaining estate. Lauren leaned forward again. Conditional. Yes, the clause was written after the watch was sold. I felt my pulse quicken. This was moving beyond the watch itself. My father had planned this carefully. The lawyer continued. The clause states that the proceeds from the watch sale must either be restored to the estate or accounted for in the final distribution. Lauren's voice sharpened. Restored, that money's already used. Then it becomes a debt against future inheritance. Silence fell. Even the faint hallway noise seemed to disappear. You're saying, she said slowly, that I owe the estate for the car. The lawyer nodded. In effect, yes. Her face flushed. That's absurd. You bought it for me. My father met her eyes. I transferred funds that weren't mine. You knew that? Yes. And now you're punishing me for it. I'm correcting it. Her chair scraped lightly as she shifted. You can't just change things like this. I already did, he replied. The calmness in his voice made the statement feel final. She turned to me suddenly. You asked for this. I shook my head. I asked about the watch. And now you're taking my car. I didn't say that. But you're not stopping it either. I held her gaze. I came for something that mattered to me. This is his decision. She looked back at him. Why go this far? He took a long breath. Because I needed to know. Know what? Whether either of you would care about what it meant. Her expression hardened. I care about real things, not sentimental antiques. He nodded slowly. That's what I needed to hear. The simplicity of the exchange felt heavier than any argument. Lauren looked away, jaw tight. The lawyer closed the document. There is also the matter of the remainder of the estate. Lauren looked up sharply. What about it? Your father revised the distribution percentages. She leaned forward again, tension visible in her shoulders. Revised how? The lawyer glanced at my father, who gave a small nod. The revised document designates the majority share to your sister, he said calmly. The words seemed to echo. Lauren didn't move for a moment. That's not funny, she said. It's not meant to be. You're serious? Yes. Her voice rose. Because of a watch? No, my father replied. Because of what followed? She shook her head in disbelief. This is unbelievable. He didn't argue. He simply watched her, the same measured calm in his eyes. What about me? She demanded. You're still included, the lawyer said, but your share is reduced and subject to the condition regarding the proceeds. Lauren laughed once sharply. So I either pay back the money or I lose more. That's correct. She stood abruptly, pacing toward the window. Outside, the Tesla sat in the parking lot, glossy and silent. She stared at it, arms wrapped around herself. You planned this, she said without turning. My father answered quietly. I planned to see clearly. She spun around. You set me up. I gave you a choice. You didn't tell me. I didn't need to. The tension filled the room again, thick and immovable. I watched them both, realizing that this moment wasn't just about money or inheritance. It was about recognition, about who valued what and why. Lauren's voice softened slightly, though the anger remained. So what happens now? My father leaned back, his expression steady. Now we decide how to make it right. The lawyer gathered the papers, waiting. Lauren looked from him to me, then back again. You really expect me to give the car back? No one answered immediately. The question hung in the air, unresolved. Outside, the clouds shifted, sunlight glinting briefly across the Tesla's dark surface. Inside, everything felt poised on the edge of a decision. Lauren kept staring through the window, her reflection faintly overlaying the glossy curve of the Tesla outside. For the first time since I'd arrived, she looked uncertain, caught between pride and calculation. The car, which had seemed like a trophy only hours earlier, now looked more like a question. I'm not giving it back, she said finally, still facing the glass. I can't. I already told everyone. My job, my friends, they all know. It's mine. My father didn't respond immediately. He watched her quietly, the same calm patience he'd carried since the lawyer arrived. When he spoke, his voice was softer than before. That's your decision. She turned toward him sharply. You're really going to do this? I already did. You're choosing her. No, he said. I'm choosing fairness. She laughed bitterly. Fairness, after all these years. The words landed heavier than she probably intended. I felt the history behind them. Childhood resentments, quiet comparisons, invisible competitions that never truly disappeared. My father seemed to feel it too. He leaned forward, resting his hands on his knees. I've made mistakes, he said quietly, but this isn't one of them. Lauren shook her head, pacing again. You sold it. You created this situation. And now you're punishing me for accepting what you offered. I'm not punishing you, he replied. I'm correcting the outcome. The lawyer remained silent, observing, letting the family tension unfold. I realized he had seen scenes like this before, inheritances revealing truths that conversations never could. Lauren stopped pacing and looked at me. Say something, she said. You don't actually want this. You don't need the money. I held her gaze. I didn't come for the money. Then tell him to drop it. I considered that. Part of me wanted to end the tension, to restore the room to something simpler. But another part remembered Grandpa's words, the deliberate weight in his voice when he gave me the watch. This wasn't just about the car. It was about acknowledging what had been taken. I can't, I said quietly. This isn't mine to stop. She looked hurt, then frustrated. So you're just going to stand there while he takes everything back? I'm standing here while he makes his decision. She turned back to him. And if I don't agree? He answered without hesitation. Then the adjustment stands. The certainty in his tone left little room for argument. Lauren sank into the chair, the fight draining from her posture. For a moment she looked younger, like someone realizing the ground had shifted beneath her. The lawyer cleared his throat gently. There's also another matter your father asked me to clarify. Lauren lifted her head. What now? The watch itself. My attention sharpened instantly. What about it? The buyer has not yet taken permanent possession, he said. The auction house placed it on hold after your father requested a review. I blinked. It's still there. Yes, the transfer is pending final payment clearance. Lauren stared at him. You mean, it hasn't actually left? My father nodded. I asked them to delay. The realization hit me slowly. He had sold it, but he had also left a window open, a narrow one but intentional. Why, I asked. He looked at me, because I wasn't sure yet. Sure about what? About what mattered more. The room fell quiet again. The meaning settled heavily between us. He had created a situation where the watch became a catalyst, a measure. Not just for Lauren, but for himself. The lawyer continued. If the estate reimburses the auction house, the watch can be returned. Lauren exhaled sharply. You're serious? Yes. She looked at me. You'd rather have that old watch than let this go? Yes, I said simply. She shook her head. I don't understand you. I know. My father leaned back, his expression softening. Your grandfather always said she valued time differently. Lauren's eyes flicked between us. So what happens if the watch comes back? The lawyer answered. The estate records will be adjusted accordingly. The proceeds would no longer count as distributed. And the car, she asked. That remains your responsibility. She stared at the floor, thinking. The silence stretched. I could almost hear the calculations' money pride appearances. The Tesla outside glinted faintly in the sunlight, its polished surface reflecting the quiet room. Finally, she spoke. I can't afford to pay it back all at once. The lawyer nodded. There are structured options. My father watched her carefully. You don't have to decide today. She looked up. But the will stays changed. Yes. She let out a long breath. So either way, things are different now. He nodded. The weight of that settled over all of us. This wasn't just about the watch or the car anymore. It was about a shift in how we stood in relation to each other. Lauren glanced toward the window again. It was supposed to be a fresh start, she murmured. My father replied gently, sometimes fresh starts come from fixing old things. She didn't answer. Instead, she sat quietly, her posture less rigid now, as if the fight had drained into something more reflective. I realized then that the revenge, if that's what it was, wasn't loud or explosive. It was quiet or rooted in consequence. My father hadn't raised his voice once. He had simply allowed the truth to unfold. The lawyer gathered the documents. Shall I prepare the restoration paperwork? My father looked at me. Do you want it back? I thought of Grandpa's chair, the sunlight, the soft ticking. Yes. He nodded. Then let's bring it home. Lauren closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them, the anger had softened into something more complicated, resignation maybe, or understanding. Outside, the Tesla sat silently in the lot, no longer looking like a victory. Just a car, just an object. Inside, time felt like it had shifted back into place. The drive back from the nursing home was quieter than any silence I could remember. Lauren followed in the Tesla, the car gliding behind us like a shadow that no longer seemed triumphant. My father sat in the passenger seat beside me, his hands resting loosely in his lap. He looked tired but not burdened, more like someone who had finally set something down after carrying it too long. We didn't talk much on the way home. The late afternoon sun filtered through the trees, streaking the road with shifting bands of light. I noticed my father watching the scenery as if memorizing it. When we pulled into the driveway, he remained seated for a moment before opening the door. Lauren parked behind us. She stepped out slowly, no longer holding her keys like a prize. The car still looked impressive, but the shine had lost its edge. It was just metal and glass again. Inside, the house felt different. The tension from the night before had faded, replaced by a fragile calm. My father lowered himself into his chair, exhaling softly. Lauren lingered near the kitchen counter, unsure of where to stand. I'll call the auction house tomorrow, he said quietly. We'll arrange the return. I nodded. Thank you. Lauren looked at him. So that's it. For now. She hesitated. And the rest stays. Yes. She absorbed that, then glanced at me. I guess things change. They do, I said gently. She nodded once, then moved to the window. Outside, the Tesla reflected the fading light. She didn't look proud anymore, just thoughtful. The next morning passed slowly. My father spoke with the auction house, his voice steady measured. I listened from the hallway, hearing fragments confirmation reimbursement shipment. When he hung up, he turned to me. It'll be ready for pickup tomorrow, he said. A strange relief moved through me, quiet but deep. I'll go with you. He nodded. I'd like that. Lauren remained mostly silent that day. She moved around the house carefully, as if unsure of her place in the new arrangement. Once she approached me while I was making coffee. I didn't realize it meant that much, she said quietly. I know. She looked down. I thought it was just something old. It was, I replied, but it wasn't only that. She nodded, accepting the answer without argument. It felt like the first honest moment between us in years. The next afternoon, we drove together to the auction house downtown. The building smelled faintly of polished wood and paper. A representative greeted us and brought out a small velvet-lined box. When he opened it, the watch rested inside unchanged. The metal caught the light, the face calm and familiar. For a moment, no one spoke. My father reached for it first, lifting it carefully. He turned it over in his hand, studying the scratches, the worn edges. Your grandfather wore this every day, he murmured. I nodded. He looked at me, then extended it. It belongs with you. I took it gently. The weight felt exactly as I remembered, solid, steady. When I held it close, I could almost hear the faint ticking again. Lauren watched quietly from behind us. Her expression was unreadable but softer than before. We completed the paperwork and stepped back outside. The air felt cooler, the city quieter. My father walked slowly beside me. I should have handled it differently, he said. Yes. I thought forcing the situation would reveal things. It did. He gave a faint smile, not always comfortably. Nothing important is. We reached the car. He paused before getting in. Your grandfather believed you understood time better than I did, he said. I looked at the watch in my hand. I think he meant understanding what lasts. He nodded as if that answered something. When we returned home, Lauren was already there. The Tesla sat in the driveway, but she wasn't near it. Instead, she stood on the porch waiting. You got it back, she said. Yes. She stepped aside as we entered. Her eyes followed the watch briefly, then moved away. I've been thinking, she said quietly. I'll work out the repayment. Slowly, but I will. My father nodded. That's fair. She exhaled as if accepting the weight of the decision. I don't want this hanging over everything. It won't, he said gently. That evening we sat together in the living room. No arguments, no raised voices, just the soft hum of the lamp and the faint ticking from the watch now resting on my wrist. My father leaned back, closing his eyes for a moment. I'm glad you came home, he said. I'm glad I did too. Lauren looked at us both, then smiled faintly. I guess Grandpa would have liked this ending. I thought about that. The quiet, the understanding, the return of something lost. I think he would. The sun faded, leaving the room warm and dim. I glanced at the watch again, feeling its steady rhythm. I had gone to the Middle East as a soldier focused on missions and distance. I came home to something different, a reconciliation shaped not by anger but by consequence. Before the night ended, I stood and looked toward the window. The Tesla remained outside, no longer a symbol of victory or defeat, just part of the story. I turned back, my voice calm. If this story meant something to you, if you've ever seen family tested by time or choices that change everything, tell me where you're watching from. I read every comment, and your experiences shape the stories we share. We bring new ones every day, quiet truths and difficult moments. So subscribe if you want to keep walking this road with us. Sometimes the smallest objects carry the deepest meaning. Sometimes time gives us another chance. And sometimes coming home is the real inheritance.